All right, folks, looks like we have got enough folks to start here at 6 p.m. We'll go ahead and get the City Council meeting for February 24th off to a start, calling in meeting to order at 6 p.m. Before we get started with our agenda this evening, if you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and do a roll call. Ms. Trimble, when you're ready.
Absolutely. Good evening. Beginning with Anderson.
Present.
Becerra.
Present.
Campbell.
Here.
Carlino. Is he absent?
I believe he is. He's not physically. He's on his way down. Okay, so he's not here yet, but we'll make sure you know when he's in the room.
I'll watch for him. Farmer is absent.
Yes.
Jones.
Present.
Jordan.
Present.
Nelson.
Present.
Nugent.
Present.
Savage.
Present.
Cheryl.
Present.
Masika.
Present.
We do have a quorum.
All right, great. Thank you very much. We've got 2 sets of minutes for City Council's review. Oh, and great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Councilor Melson. For the record, it is 6:02 p.m. and Ms. Trimble, Councilor Carlino is here. Thank you very much. All right. Approval of the minutes. We've got 2 sets, one from August 26th and another from February 10th. And check in on that for a second. We have a weird Star Wars thing happening this evening. I have my microphone off. Just folks double check.
It should be fixed now.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Claire, could you give us an indication why we have minutes from the 26th of August of 2024?
Yes. So we had in August was when, or in the middle of summer is when the council voted or approved to move away from transcribed minutes. And at that time, we gave our transcriptionists a heads up that we would no longer be utilizing their services. And unfortunately, they did not continue transcribing items we had already given them at the time. And so after much back and forth, we had to go back in time and do them ourselves. So this is actually the last of that cleanup, and we should be all caught up at this time.
Okay, thank you. I very much appreciate that clarification. Do any council members have any changes or questions on either of the sets of minutes? Okay. Not seeing any or seeing any online. Those minutes will remain as submitted. Thank you. Next, we have our committee schedule for this coming Wednesday, the 26th of February. Claire, do you have any changes or anything to add for the committee schedule this Wednesday?
No changes that I'm aware of.
All right, great. Though that committee schedule is on the City of Missoula City Council website. All of the committee agenda items are also attached for your reference on there as well. All right, so next we'll go ahead and move into special presentations and proclamations. And we don't have any neighborhood council updates this evening, but we do have a proclamation for March for Meals Month. And let me just call that up here real briefly. All right, thanks for bringing that on screen. All right, here we go. This is a joint proclamation with the Missoula County. So Missoula County and the City of Missoula, Montana, whereas the Meals on Wheels program at Missoula Aging Services is a valuable resource to older adults in Missoula County. And whereas in 2024, more than 120 Meals on Wheels volunteer drivers delivered 123,237 meals to 691 homebound individuals and community lunch sites, served 31,833 meals to 990 clients in Missoula County. And whereas volunteer drivers for Meals on Wheels are the backbone of this program through their dedication to bring not only hot, nutritious meals to clients, but also caring concern and attention to their welfare. And whereas Missoula Aging Services counts on these volunteers and the support of the community to serve the growing number of older residents who need the service to remain in their homes. And whereas we wish to raise awareness and support for Meals on Wheels in Missoula and surrounding areas. Now, therefore, we, the Missoula Board of County Commissioners and the Mayor of the City of Missoula, do hereby proclaim the month of March 2025 as March for Meals Month in Missoula, Montana, and invite residents to thank the caring volunteer drivers, recognize the value of the service to homebound elders and adults with disabilities, and encourage residents to volunteer as Meals on Wheels drivers so elders may remain in their homes. Is anybody here from Missoula Aging Services tonight that wishes to speak to this? Councilor Jordan?
Thank you. I'm not from Missoula Aging Services, but I'm the city council representative on their board, and we had a meeting today. And I just wanted to say that they're struggling a bit with some of the federal cuts and changes that are happening. And this Meals on Wheels service is a critical service. As you mentioned, you covered the statistics. There are hundreds of people in Missoula who rely on this service. And I know we're all kind of hurting in our pocketbook, but if anybody would like to donate to Missoula Aging Services to support the Meals on Wheels program and other programs that they have, that would be amazing, because they are a key to keeping Missoula's aging population healthy and independent and connected at the same time. So I just wanted to put a plug in that this is an incredible service. MAS is being hit hard at the federal level, and we would hate to see anything affect this, but thank you so much for making this proclamation.
Well, my real pleasure, absolutely. And thank you for your service on that board. Excellent organization, wonderful community partner. And I would echo Councilor Jordan's invitation for the public to not only check out what Missoula Aging Services has to offer, because it's a whole host of different services and programs, but also so many different ways to get involved. Meals on Wheels is just one of them, but it's really an excellent way to connect with community. Thank you. All right, so our next item under special presentations this evening is a rather fun item that we're happy to share with you all. We are joined by Brian Hensel this evening, who is our Deputy Director of Public Works and Mobility. And before Brian unveils the snowplow names and the contest that we did here in Missoula, I just want to say a few words. This was a suggestion that I made, that we talked with Public Works, and Director Jeremy Keene was enthusiastic about it. And the way that our community responded is really, heartwarming. Brian will share the statistics, but we had a lot of engagement. It goes to show you that no matter, we do a lot of serious work here at the city, and you can have fun too. And so with that, I'd love to turn it over to Brian Hensel. Mr. Hensel.
Good evening, everyone.
Oh, hold on one sec. There we go. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good evening. I'm Brian Hensel, Deputy Public Works Director for Public Works and Mobility Streets. It is my honor to announce the winners of the Name a Snowplow contest. And as the mayor said, we had a great response from Missoulians and received some very creative names. Probably not all of them I could read here, but apparently there were some good ones. And the contest is and was a fun way to recognize how essential snowplows and our operators are in clearing snow and ice from our streets. And these last couple of weeks, we've definitely had a chance to demonstrate that. So this is an opportunity for me and everyone to thank our crews for the long hours and the work that we've done. It's been exhaustive. And even our staff, we get a lot of phone calls and emails. So these big snow events are challenging for everyone, not just us, but the citizens of Missoula. So I'd also like to thank the community too. These are tough. So, in response here to our first naming contest, we had 388 names submitted by residents, and then apparently there was a committee that narrowed the list down to the top 20. Those names were then placed on the Engage Missoula page for citizens to vote on, looks like the top 3. And I will share the top 3 with everyone now. Number 1, the first one, the Big Leplowski with 616 votes. And that
Dude.
was submitted by Angela Medina. Number 2 was Scoop Dog with 323 votes, submitted by Will Campbell. And the third one, Darth Blader, with 309 votes, submitted by Chelsea Whitman. And we will not be painting that plow black with a red lightsaber or something, sorry. Our winners will have their pictures taken next to the plow they've named, and we'll give a picture of them, and they will also receive a swag bag. We will be in touch with them once the weather is warm enough to get the name decals on the plows. I think it has to be 55 and rising for the vinyl stickers to actually adhere to the plow. So I would also like to thank everyone who submitted and or voted. We will be back this fall to do it again. And also I want to give a shout out to Lori Hart, our Public Works Information Manager. She orchestrated and managed all this, and she did a tremendous job, and I think it was quite a bit of work, so
Yeah.
hats off to Lori.
Yeah, very well said, Mr. Hensel. Thank you. Any questions for Brian before he sits down? All right, excellent. Thank you, and I just want to echo the appreciation for you and your team, the entire Public Works Streets Division. There's an enormous amount of effort that goes into the work that you do every day to keep our streets clean and safe, and you handle it also with constituent calls and concerns with a lot of care and respect. And I just want to say how much we appreciate that. Missoula has now joined several communities from around the world that have taken part in this fun activity, and I just appreciate the good nature way that you and your team have entered into this. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everyone.
You bet. All right. We're looking forward to that. Okay. That wraps up our special presentations and proclamations section of the agenda. And we don't have any public hearings this evening, and we do not have any new business. So next we'll move on to the consent agenda. And Ms. Trumbull, I'll ask that you go ahead and post the consent agenda on screen. It's quite short this evening. And we'll go ahead and read the items on the consent agenda and see if we've got any council comments. If there's any separation, we'll make sure we take public comment on the consent agenda, and then we'll take a vote.
Yes, only 3 items today. Could almost do them in one breath. This evening, we have a motion to ratify accounts payable for checks or claims dated February 18th, 2025 in the amount of $1,179,430.42. We have a second group of accounts payable claims dated February 25th, 2025 in the amount of $1,237,943.43. And our final motion this evening is to confirm the promotion of Luke Dunning as fire captain and the promotion of Kory Garman as fire captain per Missoula Code annotated 7-3-4122.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Ms. Trumbull. Are there any city council members that wish to separate any of the 3 items? Okay. Not seeing any. Then we'll go ahead and take public comment on the consent agenda. Anybody have public comment this evening? In the room, come on up. I'm not seeing any members of the public wishing to make comment on the consent agenda. Is there anybody online wishing to make comment on the consent agenda? All right. Not seeing any, then we can do a voice vote on this when you're ready.
All right, voting on this evening's 3-item consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And any opposed? All right, and that passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. That wraps up our consent agenda, and we'll now move to regular business. We do have a couple of items under the committee of the whole, and so we have 3 motions, 2 items. So we'll start with item 9.1CB, which is a proposal to make motions to table debatable, and this is Councilor Carlino. And this is previously held in committee on May 22nd, 2024. And so, Councilor Carlino, would you like to speak to this?
Yes. So this proposal is to add 1 sentence to city council rules to make it to where whenever a city council member motions to table an item, that we're able to speak about that before that decision's made as a council, to allow every council member the opportunity to speak on behalf of our constituents before we make that vote on whether or not to table an item. And I brought this forward because I think each council member should be able to represent their constituents and get to say whether or not something should be tabled / voted down before we take that vote. So essentially, as the rules are currently written, it's to where it would go straight to a vote without letting city council members the opportunity to even speak on this item, which has led to city council members missing the opportunity to speak on behalf of our constituents and to bring their voice to this table. So I think it's really important that as an elected body that we're able to speak on behalf of our constituents and get the opportunity to help put our input into why a policy decision is voted down before we take that vote. So I think it's an essential cornerstone of our democracy as electeds to be able to speak on important policy proposals before we vote on them. And that's why I brought this forward, to help correct the rules here, to make it to where council members are able to speak on behalf of their constituents. And I understand the majority of council voted against it in committee, which is unfortunate for our democracy, but I am happy to take any questions or comments on it today as well.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. So are there questions from council for Councilor Carlino? And I see Councilor Jordan, your hand is raised. Question? It's a comment? Okay, we'll come back to you to make sure we have questions first. Any other questions? Okay. Not seeing any other questions, then we'll go ahead and hear the main motion. So I'll look to President Cheryl, Councilor Cheryl, for reading the recommended motion, if you would, please.
Okay, I kind of forgot this was in my committee. So I recommend that we do not pass a motion to amend the City Council Rule 23 and override Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedures to allow for debate on motions to table.
Okay, thank you very much. And so now it comes back to council deliberation, and Councilor Jordan.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilman Carlino, for bringing this forward. Mason's rules were written a long time ago, and back when I think things weren't as politically divided as they are now. I've seen the tabling rule be used to cut off council member comment and to also get something off the council floor that people don't want to vote on publicly. And it's being used as a tool to prohibit discourse and public voting and transparency for our constituents to see how their councilors are recommending them. And that is the main reason why I fully support this. Being one of the minority members on city council, which is ironic because most of us are Democrats, I find that this tool has been used against me on my proposals and when I've had my hand raised. And I've been on here 3 years now, and it is definitely being used deliberately to quiet voices and to steer the conversation in particular directions, and not as it was meant to be used, which is a tool to put something in committee so that it can be used, discussed further. It's just disappointing to me to be on a council with a bunch of Democrats who continually vote against transparency and voter rights. And I'll go into that comment with the next motions that we're going to cover. We're all on the same team here. And it's just bizarre to me that we are continually pushed back against us who are minority members because people are essentially afraid to have comment on the council floor. So however we decide, if yes is for it or yes is against it, I will definitely be in support of this because I think that we should always be able to have conversations on the council floor and be transparent to our voters and not be afraid. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Jordan and Councillor Campbell.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, and yes, thank you, Councilman Daniel Carlino, for bringing this forward. We have a couple issues tonight dealing with government transparency and accountability, and in fact, democratic process in general. And, you know, it's unfortunate in this case, we have a do not pass recommendation here. I'll be voting against the do not pass recommendation just solely on why I feel are practical grounds. I think something's about to be tabled. I don't think it takes much effort, much time to have everybody at this table have a right to statement about the tabling of the item, be it the sponsor or co-sponsors or what have you, and have one last opportunity to make sure that, you know, they could do that prior to a vote of a tabling. And I think from a practical purpose, you know, this makes sense, and it's necessary for transparency and accountability, which I've, you know, always supported here my time on council. So, yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you for your comments. And Councillor Vasika.
Thanks. I agree with the majority of what my previous councilors have said, and I just wanted clarification on how this vote how we vote on this one. I'm assuming that a yes vote means a no vote, but a no vote means a yes vote. Is that how that works this time?
This is.
I think that we decided last time it was easier to vote the straight motion.
Okay,
So the recommendation out of committee was that the committee did not recommend passing it, but you should vote as though you were reading the motion in its plain form. Is that okay with everyone?
Thank you for asking that clarification, Councillor Vasika. So yes, the motion is a recommend do not pass. So a yes would be to not pass. Just want to make sure we're clear about that. And a no would be.
No.
Do not, the recommend do not pass.
So as Claire just articulated, if you vote yes on it, it means you want it to pass. And if you vote no on this, it means you want it to not pass. The bracketed language is not included in the proposal. It's just a notation for what happened in committee. So if you want to amend City Council Rule 23 and override Mason's manual, you should vote yes. If you do not want to amend City Council Rule 23 and override Mason's manual, you should vote no.
Thank you for that clarification. I thought we were going to be revising the actual motion to make that a little bit more simple for me and also for the public. So maybe we can think about that going forward. Okay.
Well, we'll try again, Mayor. Apologies.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay. Councillor Sherrill.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a notation that we saw that because it says previously held in committee 522 and that we saw it 2 weeks ago as well. So, I mean, I think that seems obvious. If you look at these are notes from committee. Also, I just want to remind the public that when someone moves to table something, everyone on this committee votes on whether we table it or not.
Okay. Thank you for your clarification. Other council comments? Councillor Anderson, did you have one?
Yes, thanks so much, Madam Mayor. And yeah, I want to expand on what Councilwoman Sherrill just said. If you think that there needs to be more debate, the easiest way to do it is just to vote no on tabling. That's all that tabling motion does, is it allows, if the majority of the body feels as though enough debate and conversation has transpired, then they would vote on tabling. If they think that there are still subsequent substantial comments to be made that could sway or inform people, then they vote no to tabling. And I do not feel it is a tool within a very large tool chest within Masons, and it is not used to target anybody specifically, quiet any voices, despite what some people may think of that's the case. It is not, and it really kind of does impugn other people on council's motives, which is against our rules. But so it's just simply a tool for us to move debate along when sometimes, as former Mayor Engen would say, sometimes we have beaten the dead horse and have had enough. So it's just a tool, and it's very transparent because everyone votes on it. So that's all of my comments on that.
Thank you, Councilor Anderson. All right. I really don't want to get back into rebuttals. Is there an additional question that you have, Councilor Jordan?
No, it was rebuttal against.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to really entertain the back and forth this evening. I appreciate that. I would welcome additional comments or additional questions for Councilor Carlino. Is this an additional question, Councilor Campbell?
Well, with all due respect, Madam Mayor, we don't have a heavy agenda tonight. It's only 6:26. I think we have time to hear what needs to be said by all my colleagues here. So I'd appreciate an opportunity for that. Respectfully request so.
Okay, I appreciate that very much. Other members of the council, any other questions or comments this evening? Councilor Nugent.
Thanks. I don't have any question, but comments. Every legislative body has to have rules, and we seem to get caught up on this a lot. And I see Councilwoman Jordan shaking her head, and she's perfectly allowed to disagree, and that's perfectly fine. But it does seem like every time something doesn't go some council member's way, it's either we need to change the rules or it wasn't transparent. And yet, often, they're some of the members that speak the most on issues or introduce the most number of topics or referrals. So it's like, I think this call to transparency is somewhat frustrating because, again, bodies all around this country use basically the motion to table to end debate. And if enough people on the body say it's time to end the debate, then that's how democracy works. It's not anti-democratic whatsoever. And many of the items that were referred to in the committee actually had been discussed in committee multiple times. So I just think that it's important, if the public is watching this conversation, that we are debating rules on how to run a meeting, and it is not anti-democratic to say if enough people who are elected to represent their constituents feel like this isn't a topic worth further discussing, that we're not going to discuss it. I also think that there are times, and there have been referrals in the past that have been tabled, where people were trying to use those referrals to make political points or to attack sitting U.S. senators or things of that nature. And frankly, it is okay to say, no, we don't want to push this forward, that we don't think this is worth discussing at the council chambers of the city of Missoula. And I think that that is a perfectly reasonable stance for council members to have.
Thank you for your comments, Councilor Nugent. And Councilor Campbell, I agree, we don't have a heavy agenda this evening, and I do certainly want to be able to hear additional questions or concerns. I do not want to see a back and forth of, so I'd appreciate if folks have the opportunity to remain, just think about what it is that you want to rebut in a useful fashion and not in a repetitive fashion. That would be one thing that I would appreciate any council thinking about, just getting the last word on the floor. So Councilor Carlino, before I call on you though, I'd like to give the opportunity back to Councilor Jordan because she did ask to speak again.
Thank you, Mayor. I do appreciate that, and I understand that you're trying to set a precedent and not have a big debate tonight. It's just exceptionally frustrating when the majority members talk about how the minority members aren't being targeted. I think that comes from somebody who sits in a place of power on this city council and somebody who has not had the tabling motion used against their referral in the past, like I have. So to sit there and say that it's not a problem means that it's because you've never had to experience it.
Okay. And Councilor Carlino.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to make some clarifying points. When we vote on tabling without letting council members speak at least once to a motion, we're making a really important political decision on behalf of our community. without even letting council members speak on behalf of their constituents. We do have something to end the debate. It's called a motion to call the motion. And that this rule change does not affect that. Certainly you could call the motion if you want to end the debate, and it feels like that's what you all are arguing for, is to be able to call the motion, which has nothing to do with this. A motion to table is essentially a motion to kill a proposal and to not even bring it up for a vote. And you still have the motion to call to call the question on any proposal, whether or not this passes. But a motion to table without letting council members speak on their constituents, I do think is preventative to a representative government, and I think everybody should be able to at least speak once, and that's what we're aiming to accomplish here. So we still have the motion to call a question, even if we pass this, and then you can end that debate like you all are arguing for. But a motion to table, have council members not even be able to speak once on behalf of their constituents and then vote a proposal down, seems undemocratic to me. So I just wanted to make that clarification between calling the question and a motion to table.
Thank you for your comments. I have a procedural question. I'm going to look to Councilor Nugent or Councilor Anderson for this. Start with you, Councilor Nugent. I'm on Rule 23, which is motions to lay on the table. These are council rules. When an item has been tabled, the item shall remain on the table for a period of up to 6 months, then shall automatically cease to exist unless one of the following actions occurs. A motion is approved to remove the item from the table, or a motion is approved to continue the item's tabled status for an additional period of time or until a specified condition is met. And would you speak to the ability for motions to come off the table with the support from multiple city council members?
Yeah, basically, Madam Mayor, the committee that the item is tabled in, or I guess in theory that this body as a whole could, from top down, make a motion to bring it off the table. And I believe that's just a simple majority. Looking at Ms. Anderson, who's nodding her head. So that motion could be made, but I believe that is just a procedural, like, I don't think it's a large presentation and debate. I think it's just a motion to bring it off the table and a yes or no vote.
Okay, thank you for that.
But you might have to consult an expert on that, because I don't know that for certain.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, Madam Mayor, it is my understanding that if something is tabled, the majority can bring it back onto the floor to continue discussion. So, for example, if it was not ready to be voted on, but folks wanted to give more time, or there was extenuating circumstances having to do with that piece of legislation, that, that's the way to kind of keep it, set it on the table to be revisited if the majority feels the need to revisit it. If nothing is made a motion within the 6 months, it automatically goes away and can be brought up again. Or it can be, if we were waiting on something specific, you could make a motion to continue tabling it for either another 6 months or date certain within that 6 months.
Okay. And what does it look like does the majority have to be the referring?
I do not believe that you have to be in the, the winning to, if you were in favor of tabling it, I don't believe you have to then be the one to bring the motion to untable it. I think it's just whoever and then a simple majority.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Any other council questions or comments in regards to this item? Okay. Not seeing any, then Ms. Trimble will go ahead and do a roll call vote, please. And if you all summarize the structure of the vote per Councilor Vasika's question.
Can you just remind me, did we take public comment?
No, we did not. I'm kidding. Public comment on this item, please.
Hi, Brandia Tanasoff, Ward 5. I study human behavior, and honestly, tabling something says, hey, I know I threw some shit at you, and I'm sorry for the language. And I know that you didn't have time to think about it. And so tabling says, I give you time to make sure that everybody's okay. So as someone that analyzes human behavior, I could literally be like, well, 7 out of 11 of these people can be pushed to folding if I go too long. So debating in politics is used to manipulate the population. So if I bring up something that's super complex, drop it on your laps, and you've never looked at it before, and I don't want to table it to let you look at it later in your own time, then it makes me feel like maybe I'm a little selfish. Because tabling gives someone a second to make sure that people are okay. Because at the end of the day, I know that you guys are all exhausted, and we saw Mike fold, and let Jordan Hess be mayor after he's been very qualified, because at the end of the day, you guys went for a very long time talking about that. So when we go for long times talking about things, we fold, and at the end of the day, I can bring something to the table that is turned and tossed and upside down, and if I can get you guys debating for a couple of hours and get the 6 of you that fold every time to fold, then I control the fucking world, right? Oh my God, I'm so sorry for the language.
Thank you for checking your profanity. Appreciate that.
So, I am sorry for the language, but my point is that tabling is showing respect for your peers and respect for your community. And I appreciate the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Atanasoff. All right, other members of the public wishing to make comment on this agenda item, please.
Hi there, my name is Anna Adams. I believe I live in Ward 2. I hadn't planned to speak on this topic, but from what it seems like, it's not the reality of debating rappers. It seems as if the request is to allow a comment from each counselor before the decision's tabled. If there are time limits, as in national processes, I feel like that could be considered. But I've seen nationally how tabling can be abused in one way or another. So for Missoula, it's 6:30. There is always time to hear input from every council member within a reasonable set of time. And that's all I have.
Thank you for making public comment this evening. Other members of the public wishing to make comment on this agenda item? Not seeing any in the room. Any online? Any online wishing to make public comment on this agenda item? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised. So that does then wrap up the public comment on this item. We will go ahead and we will move to a roll call vote, please.
All right, we're going to do a roll call vote. You're going to vote on the motion as written. So we're voting on a motion to amend City Council Rule 23 and override Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure to allow for debate on motions to table. A yes vote is in favor of a rule change. A no vote is in opposition to a rule change. Beginning with Anderson.
No.
Becerra.
No.
Campbell.
Yes.
Carlino.
Yes.
Jones.
No.
Jordan.
Yes.
Nelson.
No.
Nugent.
Nope.
Savage.
No.
Cheryl.
No.
And Vasika.
Yes.
That's 4 in favor, 7 opposed. The motion does not pass.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for the discussion, everyone. We'll move on to the next agenda item, 9.1 CC, adopting term limits for members of city council and mayor of the city. There are two different motions in this agenda item, and we'll go ahead and take those motions separate, but we'll hear from Councilor Carlino first.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to them at the same time and of course, vote on them separately. Since my time on city council, I've never seen us as a body vote against setting a public hearing. A public hearing is a chance for the community to come forward and speak on behalf of how they think about an issue. And we have never once over the last 3 or 4 years, and probably much farther, ever voted against setting a public hearing. But alas, we're here today where that's likely to happen. Public hearings are, important for our democracy. It's important to let people have that opportunity to come speak in front of council and to fully debate, hear public comment, and actually hear what the community has to say about an issue before we make an important political decision. What's in front of us today is to allow the voters of Missoula to decide whether or not they would like term limits for their elected representatives of city council and mayor, and to cap it at a 12-year maximum or 3 full term limits. And I believe there's a lot of arguments, whether you're for or against term limits, but I think we can all come together and believe that the voters of Missoula should get to make this choice for themselves. The reason that I'm bringing forward this proposal is because I don't believe that we should be having career politicians, and we should not have such advantages financially and through institutions to help the incumbents, but rather create an opportunity for everyday people to get elected to Missoula City Council or Missoula Mayor. And I think anything that you'd like to get done in your time as City Council or Mayor could certainly be done in 12 years. And I know we see a lot of people like the president right now, and many of us around this horseshoe that would like to think that people should be able to run for unlimited number of terms. And that really comes with quite an advantage as being an incumbent, and it pushes everyday people out of the political sphere. So, I'd like us to at least just vote to move forward with the public hearing, allow a full public process, and ultimately let the voters of Missoula decide. I think the voters of Missoula can make this decision for themselves and don't need 12 people making this decision for them. I think voters of Missoula would overwhelmingly support term limits for their elected representatives. And I think, that's the reason that this is the only thing we've ever seen on city council where you all don't even let it have a public hearing, is because it affects your own personal job. And I think that's quite a disgrace for democracy, for the democratic process. I think if you believe in democracy, you would let people vote for themselves and not make that decision for them, or at least certainly let the public hearing happen and let us have a full process before just shutting that door and closing it on Missoulians. So it's really unfortunate. I'm really grateful that we have term limits for mayor. Have term limits for president and governor and our state legislators, and I certainly think that we should have it for mayor and city council members as well. So I ask that we set a public hearing and let us have a full democratic process here. And ultimately, I think we should just let the voters of Missoula decide. Who are we to think that we know better than the voters of Missoula on what they would like? I guess finally I should speak to some of the points brought up in committee about this. Some people brought up that we haven't heard any comments in favor or against this. Let's set a public hearing, and then I'm sure we'll get plenty of comments. I think we heard people say that we had a local government study commission. When that's happened in the past, those didn't include term limits. To say that this vote on whether or not we want Missoulians to have term limits is synonymous to the local government study is completely disingenuous. Those are two completely different things. A local government study is to pay a bunch of taxpayer dollars to allow people to study the government, which could be helpful, and Missoulians decided that they didn't want to pay that money to do that. This is completely free to add this to the ballot, and this would allow Missoulians the opportunity to make a specific decision whether or not they would want term limits for their city council members, and then a second decision whether or not Missoulians would want term limits for their mayors. I ask, why are you all so afraid of letting your constituents decide that for themselves?
Thank you, Councillor Carlino. And are there any questions from council? I see hands raised, but I'm assuming they're comments. Okay, all right. Somebody has a question here? Yeah, Councillor Anderson.
Yes, my question is for the sponsor. Why did you pick 12 years as the number when the governor and the legislature are 8 years?
Yeah, if you're speaking in favor of 8 years, I would be happy to support that if that's what the majority of city council would like. Currently, we have unlimited number of terms, which I think is certainly not the way to go. So if you are proposing 8 years, I would be happy to support that. If you are voting against this to continue having unlimited number of terms where people can run for decades and decades in office, then of course I'm against that. So there's no scientific method to figure out the full number of terms, but I'm completely open to 2 if that's what you're proposing. Or is that what you're going for?
Well, no, I was just asking where the number 12 came from and what the rationale behind it, when the comparison that you've made is again for the fact we have term limits for governor and term limits for legislature, and those are 8 years. So I'm just curious if there was some sort of study, best practice, something additional that led to the 12 years. That's all I'm asking, is where did that number come from?
Yeah, I think essentially just you wouldn't currently, term anybody out of city council right now. And I just thought that, some of the council members that were not in favor of capping themselves at 8 years might be open to capping themselves at 12 years and capping city council at 12 years or mayor. Or allowing the Missoula voters to decide that for themselves. But I'm certainly open to 8 years or 12 years. I think unlimited number of terms like we are right now is really not the way to go. So if you want 8 years, I'm happy to support that as well.
Nope, I just asked a question.
Okay, any other questions from council? Okay, not seeing any other questions, then Councillor Cheryl, if you'll read both motions, we'll put both on the floor before we open the public hearing and ask for public comment this evening.
Okay, I'm happy to. Should I read it with the brackets in it if we're putting a motion on the floor because we're voting the opposite way?
No, I would just read the motion.
Okay.
That's just information that came out of committee.
Okay, so thank you. That's because I think I read it wrong last time. I recommend that we set a public hearing on March 24th, 2025 on an ordinance submitting the question to whether to amend the city's charter to adopt term limits for the positions of the city council members to the electors of the city of Missoula. I'm going to continue. I recommend setting a public hearing on March 24th, 2025 on an ordinance submitting the question to whether to amend the city's charter to adopt term limits for the position of mayor of the city to the electors of the city of Missoula.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Cheryl. I'd like to offer the opportunity for the public to come up and comment before it comes back to council debate. So, public comment on this agenda item. Anybody wishing to speak tonight?
I'm Lucas Moody, Ward 1. I think the motion on the floor is simply to have a public hearing, which I believe you owe to your constituents. Regardless of what the people of Missoula decide, at least having that debate seems to be a reasonable thing to put to the public to let them actually have an input into that. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment this evening. Anybody else wishing to make public comment?
I've got mixed feelings on term limits, and we'll use our presidential candidacy. I'm so grateful.
Will you identify yourself, sir?
Big K, Montana.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful we did not have term limits when we had a president in there had oversight of good, responsible experience in our government. You know, being a freshman in government, I'm kind of afraid of that. I'd rather have a extended term limit individual in office of Congress and Senate because the complexity of our world is getting dangerous. Greenhorn and ignorance does not work well with intellectual governments on the other side. So let me stay fast in regards to our city council. To run this city, especially when it comes to budget time, you want experience that knows how to roll it through. I'm gonna mix feelings on term limits because good quality experience is hard to find, and if you get that to stay in government or legislative city, that's a good idea.
Thank you for your comments this evening. All right, anybody else wishing to make public comment tonight? Okay, not seeing anybody in the room. How about online? Are there members of the public wishing to make comment on the recommended motions, which are a do not pass, for setting public hearings? Okay, not seeing any public comment online. So then we'll go ahead and we'll bring it back to council debate, and Councilor Jordan.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Carlino, I will definitely be in support of both of these motions. I think that we need to be creating opportunities for new people to have their spots on city council and in our mayoral position, as well as any elected position. We've certainly seen entrenched elected officials locally that have the advantage of their incumbency that gets them elected again. And it tends to override up and coming political aspiring constituents. I just am exceptionally disappointed in my colleagues on city council with this one. As Mr. Carlino said, this is the first time in our history on council that our colleagues have refused to even allow a public hearing. Public hearing is neither consent or dissent. It is just to bring something to the floor to allow the public to be a part of a process. And when we talk about whether or not this body is becoming more conservative, I would argue that this is a case in point where we are becoming more conservative, where we are too afraid to have a public hearing to allow the public to weigh in on something that might affect us in a way that we don't think we want is conservative. It is not transparent. It is against the democratic process, and it is self-serving. And for anyone on this council who has said that city council is not becoming more conservative, this is a case in point about how you are becoming more conservative. I will definitely be in favor of both of these, and I appreciate you for bringing them forward, Mr. Carlino.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may, I actually had a question I just thought of for Councilor Carlino, if I could first, and then proceed to statements. So just to clarify, for those of us that come into office via, say, a partial term or appointment or something, none of that time that you hold in office at that point counts towards what would be a full 4-year term, if you're talking 12 years. Is that correct?
Yes, we couldn't write this in, this is a completely baked proposal ready to go for the voters of Missoula, and it couldn't be written in specific number of years because we can't, kick people off midterm. So this is written to allow the voters of Missoula to decide whether or not they would like people to serve a maximum of 3 full terms. So if, like your question is asking, if they've served a partial term, that would not be included in the 3 full terms here.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to be in support of Councilman Carlino's proposals here. It just amazes me that, here we are just talking simply about public hearing to discuss the issue on this body. In mere minutes here, the Democrat progressive, and I'll call them Democrat progressive majority, they are what they are, is going to vote against this. And I know it's been brought up during committee last week about the local government study committee. First of all, that's $200,000 right off the get-go that's allocated for that. People are tired of spending money. It seems like just talking to people even about that issue, people come to me and say, it seems like we throw down 6 figures for a study every month here for something or another. And now you want me to voluntarily vote to spend $200,000 for another study? So, there's that. But, more broadly, local government study commission, as I understand it, you're looking at many different aspects of local government. You're looking at the form of local government, council manager form of government, strong mayor, some other tweaks, number of wards, makeup of council. And yeah, I think there could be a conversation of term limits in our local government study committee as well, to be honest, but it's so much broader than what's being proposed here. And, just that, I find it interesting and ironic that when the idea of local government study committee came up last year, that lo and behold, we had a public hearing for it. And I guess, one could say, well, state law mandated it, but I guess, given temperaments here tonight, I guess it's a good thing that state law mandates it, or else we probably would have shrugged that to a side last year as well. So, I'm just so disappointed with, not upholding Democrat principles on this. Just to have the chance for public come in and weigh in on it. And, should it be followed that we have a vote not to move it forward for, a vote on the ballot, and so be it, but at least hold the public hearing. At least give people an opportunity to come here and weigh in on it. But, I would say, looking at the city charter, there's a method for folks to come through with a petition, if they so choose to, take the matter into their own hands to get the required number of votes to, compel us to put this matter on the ballot. And, maybe that's what's going to come down to. I've been in contact with a gentleman that's part of a big grassroots group here in Missoula lately, and he's expressed interest in maybe bringing this forward. So I don't know. We'll see where it goes. But, I think there's certainly interest in the public with regards to term limits. And, to this gentleman's statement here, I understand, the argument of, experience on council, but I also understand, long-term consequences of entrenchment within, the political realm and the power that's vested in you of that, and how it compounds, issues down the line at the federal level, at the state level, and surely I think to some degree that'd be, certainly possible at the local level. And, we'll see where it goes over the course of the year, but, I don't think the vote here today is going to put an end to the idea of term limits. I suspect next few months it'll come up again from the people themselves, and that's what democracy is. And if this body's unwilling to uphold those democratic principles, then maybe the people will take upon themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Vasika.
Thanks. I wasn't really going to comment because I said a lot of my comments on that Wednesday 2 weeks ago. But I just have a couple of points I want to make quickly. I'm always in favor of the public being able to speak. I'm always in favor of the more things that you as the representative republic or you as the public have to say is better than silence. So with that being said, I don't know how I feel about term limits. I keep going back and forth, especially because I think that I am not in favor of term limits, even though it's been very known that I was against Engen and his entire terms, all the time that he presided over the city. I was very much against a lot of his policies. However, the people kept electing him, and that's what the people wanted, and that's how the people spoke. So that's how I keep going back and forth on that. So that's why I want to go towards the public hearing. And then it's just really interesting to hear my my ward mate say that this is how the council is becoming more conservative, because the 2 conservative members on council are going to be voting in favor of setting the public hearing. So just wanted to point out that irony. Thanks.
You bet. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jones.
Sure. I've got some comments. First of all, I'm not in favor of term limits. I will not be in favor of setting a public hearing. As was discussed in the committee, I think this is totally an appropriate topic to be in a local government study, because it's actually really, really complicated. It's not a simple one sensor that goes on the ballot. There's a lot of layers to it. So I did some research, and the more you read about term limits, not only are they complicated, but they also do not necessarily foster the best government. I'll just put it that way. I think the article that said it best is by, what was his name? Anthony Fowler from the Democracy Reform Primer Series from the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. And he did a huge study on term limits, which, the whole concept of term limits is draining the swamp, of course. Term limits would, quote, throw the rascals out, end quote, and, quote, bring new blood into office, end quote. He did a big study based on a lot of data. And the key takeaways from the research, it's, of course, a big, long academic article, but I'll just read you the bullet points. First of all, term limits would remove from office high-quality elected officials who the voters like. Term limits would reduce the incentives of elected officials to work hard and please the voters. Most incumbent success is attributable to the popularity of the candidates, not the institutional advantages of incumbency. Empirically, term limits appear to reduce economic growth and increase ideological polarization. There are still reasons why term limits can be supported, especially when our elections and governing institutions do not perform as intended. But there may be better solutions to these problems that do not sacrifice our best elected officials or remove their incentives to do a good job. And basically, that's campaign finance reform. That's where people should be looking at if they really want to make a difference in elections. But I just want to point out that in my 9 years on council, I've never received a single phone call about a constituent wanting term limits. I've never received an email from a constituent wanting term limits. I've knocked thousands of doors. It's never been a topic on the doors. So I am not convinced that we need a public hearing on this. Given the complexity of this issue, it should be in the local government study. And yeah, we are mandated by Montana state law to put that out to the voters every 10 years. It does require a budget. Every single city in Montana had to put this on the ballot, and they all had comparable budgets. So that's the way it works. And if that is something that folks vote to pick this topic up, then fine, but that should be in the local government study. I also want to point out there's a lot of talk about democracy and do we value democracy. Every election is a choice for people to vote. If you have term limits in place, you take away their options. If you don't have term limits, they get a choice if they want to continue to have an incumbent or not. We just saw John Tester not win. Strong incumbent, he did not win. Voters in Montana made a choice. So do incumbents have an advantage? I'm not convinced it's a very strong advantage. But also it's up to the voters to decide. So I am not in favor of setting a public hearing on this, and I think it's a solution looking for a problem.
Thank you, Councilor. And Councilor Nugent.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple random thoughts. My notes aren't really organized. First and foremost, I think Councilwoman Jones made a great point that campaign finance reform is at the heart of a lot of these issues, and it is something that I fully support for many reasons, not the least of which is some council members like to bring up inaccuracies over and over again to prove points, which some might call lying. But further, it isn't not upholding democratic principles to not schedule every wild idea that comes before a legislative body. I mean, there are 12 of us for a reason. Transparency and accountability includes the fact that our constituents have placed their trust in us to actually do the work, to understand the issues and vote on them. There's a reason that there is no direct democracy where every decision that's made by a council or that's made to govern a city or govern a state or govern a nation is made by direct vote, because people don't take the time to do the research on a lot of these issues. So we put a lot of faith and trust in our elected representatives. And over my lifetime, I've voted for plenty that lost, and I've voted for plenty that have won. And, I've also been on the winning side of a campaign and the losing side of a campaign, and that's all part of this. And I guess I would point out that, I obviously lost to the mayor, and I was sitting on city council and had a record, and the mayor was an outsider. And she won against myself and the sitting mayor, who had been on council for 12 plus years. So I think that this idea that there's automatically a benefit to being on this body, it also means you have a record. And you have a record of having to sit and study votes and learn them, and then deal with people who don't take the time to understand the issue, going out and telling people you're a bad person because you voted this way, when in fact that's not really accurate. So again, I think that transparency and accountability includes that we've been voted in to make these decisions. And just because something doesn't go someone's way doesn't mean that it wasn't the democratic process. I would also point out that we talked about this in committee about 2 weeks ago. This subject was the topic of news stories in the Missoulian, the Current, I believe KPAX TV did something on it. It's been all over social media pages. Several council members have put it all over their social media. I haven't seen a single email about it. I think that it starts to lose some luster if personal agendas are being kind of disguised as this council's not following the democratic process or is not transparent. 3 people in the last 30 years would have been impacted by this. The majority of the people sitting around this horseshoe right now are in their first term. I believe the stats that we talked about in the committee were 5.7 years is the average term. Do I have that correct? I believe that's what they told.
5.9.
5.9, sorry, I shortchanged it, 5.9. Which means the far majority of city council members serve 1 term or less. So to me, this bigger issue, it's not even the term limits, it's that the case hasn't been made for what the problem we're trying to solve even is. Because if it's 3 people in the last 30 years, that's not a problem. The fact that some would say for certain it would pass if it was put to the voters, but can't articulate what the problem we're trying to solve is, or the reason for doing this, I think kind of illustrates it. And the reason that many of us have spoken about the government study is because there are pros and cons to term limits. My colleague, Councilwoman Jones, did a great job of outlining that. There's data, there are peer-reviewed studies around the country on how term limits at the local level have impacted government efficiency. And I think that those are the sorts of things that we should know about before we as a body put this out to voters. And if the voters want to do the petition process and bring it forward, more power to them. This is democracy, like you said, but they voted for us to evaluate and to actually make decisions with facts and data, not feelings and agendas. And it's so clear that there's an agenda here based on where it's coming from. But before we put something to voters, like I said, we should understand the outcomes and what that means for democracy. I said in the committee hearing that I think there are some questions that aren't quite baked, and that's why I don't want to put this out for a public hearing, and I feel that that's a very valid reason not to put that out for hearing. I would also point out that in all this talk about working together, the sponsor did not reach out to me to discuss this before they brought it forward, which is their prerogative, but it kind of loses the ability to say we want to work with everybody on this if you don't actually work with everybody, because I actually have feedback. And if this does get to a public hearing, I would probably have amendments to kind of clarify a little bit of the language that I think needs to be cleaned up. There were also some comments made in the committee meeting about recent surveys and the rights for people to vote, and the voters are smarter than us. And I would agree, the voters are very smart and they're going to make their decisions. There are 2 representatives in each ward, which means every 2 years, council members get to choose a new representative in their ward. And most of those are open seats. The minority of them aren't open seats over the last 30 years. So the public can vote off a council member every 2 years. They can replace someone every 4 years. That is voters getting a say. And to imply anything different is wrong. But my biggest concern, honestly, is finding good people at the local level is tough. There's no money in these positions, despite what some of the comments like to say online on some of these news stories. Like, there is no money and glory in being on city council. It's brutal. You show up and people basically question all your motives, often don't understand the whole issue, say negative things about you and your family and people you work with and all of that. And we're concerned that somebody who is getting a small stipend to be on council might be here too long. You know, on one of the social media pages that one of my colleagues had, where they were talking about this issue, again, advertising it out to their followers who have not reached out to us. And Mr. Campbell, I think it was on your page, I think you misunderstood one of the comments from someone. They pointed out that at the local level, and this was a fairly conservative person, I think, but at the local level, term limits would be a bad thing because a strong council is the only voice that local voters have to counterbalance career public servants. And I have a great admiration for career public servants, but I think that that's why these systems work. It's because there's a body of elected people, and I am thankful that there are a few members on this body who have been in their seats for a long time and understand, you know, not only where the light switches are, but how things work, how the budget works, how our park special district works, and so that we can understand, you know, what levers make sense to pull and what ones maybe don't. I think that this feels like a thinly veiled attempt to remove good public servants by a group that's self-identified themselves as a minority in hopes to try and maybe get things passed that aren't popular with the majority of the residents. That, in fact, that's actually an argument that many people use for term limits. It's often when you're in the minority, which is fine. But again, I don't think I have any more to say on that. I think the majority of this body is in their first term. It's 5.9 years is the average. We are looking for a problem that does not exist. I do think that there's a big difference even between the council and the mayor, but I also think there's a big difference between citing the presidency and saying there's term limits of the presidency, so there should be term limits for city council in Missoula. Like, the idea that those two things are even remotely the same thing is way off base. And again, we are now talking about this. It's been 30 plus minutes. There wasn't much public comment on it. There was a committee meeting 2 weeks ago. It's been all over people's social media. So we are giving people the opportunity to talk about it right now. And very few people showed up.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carlino.
Yeah, I know I presented on this, but I'd just like to make some clarifying points. One, today we're just voting to set the public hearings. Two, this is not a debate whether or not we should have term limits. This is a debate whether or not we think our constituents and voters of Missoula should get to decide that for themselves. So it seems like it's being conflated here with whether or not we should have term limits for us, when really we're just voting on, first of all, whether or not to set a public hearing, and then at that public hearing, vote on whether or not we believe our constituents can make this decision for themselves. So I just wanted to clarify that we're not voting on term limits today, nor at the public hearing. We're just voting on whether or not we think voters of Missoula should actually get to make that decision for their community. And to vote against that, I think is a shame. And then I guess my second clarification is point well taken about the campaign finance reform. I think certainly things like that could help get new people into office. I do think it's ironic coming from the council member Nugent, who's been the most bought out council member out of anybody in the history of Missoula, taking over 6 figures from the National Association.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Wait,
That's
Councilor
totally
Carlino,
out of
Yeah,
order.
we're done with that.
Could I speak to that?
Can I speak to it? Because this.
What's the point of order? Could I clarify that?
You can finish your comment, and then Councilor Nugent will have the ability to respond to your statement.
Sure.
But I do think that you need to be careful about making personal insults and things that are leading to this degradation of conversation. So continue, please.
Yeah, I think campaign finance reform is a point well taken, and I think we saw that in the mayor election, where you took over $130,000 from the National Association of Realtors, which is one of the biggest lobbyists.
He's also
I'm going to say it right now.
truthful things, and that's not truthful.
It is not true, and you keep saying it. I will speak to it in a minute, but this
point
is
of
what
order.
I'm
You're
talking
out of
about,
order, Mr.
where you
Nugent.
are
Could you,
lying
wait your turn to
continually
speak, please?
on the floor.
All right.
Councilmember Nugent's completely out of order here with just making that statement. But this is on the campaign electronic reporting system, and everybody, this is public information. And I just want to point out that when we're talking about campaign finance reform, you can say no to that money. And I think it's very ironic that that's your point. But what we're voting on today is to set a public hearing and to allow the voters of Missoula to decide whether or not they would like term limits. And this conversation has gone far beyond that.
Thank you, Councilor Carlino, and because you raised what you did, I will give Councilor Nugent the opportunity to respond. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Davis. Mr. Carlino, you take every opportunity to sideswipe me, and I let it go. I think that it's important for the record to know that what you just said is a lie. Because you just said that people can look at the state campaign finance records and see that I took a large donation, and I, in fact, did not. And you know, because you work in politics, you are an organizer, that candidates cannot discuss or coordinate with political action committees. If you ask my opinion, I would say I don't want them anywhere near it. It didn't help me, not even a stretch. So you can smirk over there, you can smile, you can say whatever you want, but the facts are that I did not. There is a clear requirement in the law that there's a separation, and candidates don't get to make those decisions because it would be called coordination. And here I am saying that I do not want that to happen. I would love for there to be campaign finance reform, but for you to continually imply that I took a donation that I did not, and for you to say on the floor that people could go look at the records and see my campaign, which was Nugent for Missoula, and see that donation, it's not true. Because they would not see it, because that is not what happened. And you can have whatever opinion you want, but I think that you should stick to facts.
Thank you, Councilor Nugent. I'm going to take this moment to remind City Council that you do have Rule 4 in Council Rules for decorum, and that means that you are speaking with integrity on the floor. So if there are intentional statements that are shrouded in inaccuracies or lies, it's not acting with integrity. If you are mistaken on something, that is a mistake and that is understood. But I want to make sure that we're clear that we're going to continue to have this conversation with decorum and respect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next.
Sorry, Mayor, may I ask a clarifying question regarding
Sure.
that point? Does that also count for our end of city council comments, where we go on the record and make personal comments that include lies? Do we have to have rules of decorum at the end of council when we have council comments?
What I just said stands for the entire city council.
So for the
Thank you,
entire
Councilor
thing,
Jordan.
you can't lie.
And so thank you, and I will move on now to the council member who is next in order. Thank you, and I want to say that if we need to gavel out of this meeting for everybody to take a breath, we will do that. So take a breath, let's get through this conversation. Councilor Cheryl, go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have a whole lot to add other than I agree with what Ms. Jones said and what Mr. Nugent said, and I do believe that we all understand as politicians how political action coalitions work, and that is different than our direct finance, and they are separated, and they should be, but we need campaign finance reform. I also think it is I just want to highlight a couple things that my colleagues have said because I don't have a whole lot to add, but it is hard to find good people in this job, and it is really, really hard to learn this job. I studied quite a bit before I got on, and I'm in my 5th year, and I really don't think I became effective for 2 years. I also want to say, some of us have gone through a re-election on this body, and I do not believe being an incumbent helps you. I could say all sorts of things. Please don't speak while I'm speaking. You were speaking out loud. I do not think, when I first was campaigning, I had these ideas and I was very idealistic about certain things we could and couldn't do. Got onto council and we have some sideboards that I didn't realize. When I was campaigning the second time, I was knocking on doors and I was answering for decisions I had made. It was so much harder to say, why did you vote for this? Why didn't you vote for this? The Missoulian said you did this. Like all these things. It's a different beast to be campaigning in a community where you have neighbors and where you're knocking doors, because at the statewide level, they're not knocking doors the way we are. So I think that's important to remember. And I really, Daniel, I really take issue with you suggesting that we're protecting ourselves. I went through a process. I have a girlfriend who was a physician, and when she was in residency, she did her hourly rate based on how many hours she had worked that week, and she was making $3.25 an hour. And so I did that same process for myself when we were particularly busy, and I was making well below minimum wage. This is a labor of love for this community. I believe that for all of us, and I believe it for the people that I disagree with every time on council. I think we love this community. We are not getting wealthy from this job. We are making below minimum wage. So to suggest that this is protecting ourselves, I take issue with that. I don't appreciate that because we're enriching ourselves some way. So I'd appreciate if you did not suggest that. But as far as this referral, I think people do deserve to have a choice in who they want. And if for some crazy reason I do decide to run again, they should fire me if they don't. If the majority of my constituents don't like me, don't agree with me, if I'm not a good representative, they should fire me, and they will if they don't like it. So, city government, we are close to our constituents, and them having those options, I think, is great. And I think that it is a very, as Mr. Spitzmacher said, it is a very, very complicated job to do. And yeah, I'm not going to be voting for it, but I think we need to take the heat down a little bit. We need to be respectful of each other, and we need to try to be accurate in our comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Sherrill. Councilor Jordan.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's just frustrating because those who are continually silenced are blamed for being too heated. But I had a couple comments and then a question for Mr. Nugent. There are a couple things said about how this is an agenda for those of us who are in favor. I mean, it works against us as well. If this passes, it works against the people who are trying to pass it. So there's no agenda here. There was also a conflation between career public servants, who we do need. We need career public servants. We don't need career politicians, and those two terms were conflated in a recent testimony given by one of my colleagues. Also, representation is not about being experienced, folks. Like, we've forgotten what government is. If we want everybody to have a master's degree to run for office, that's not representation. What we need is a city council that looks like the people we serve. And it doesn't. It doesn't look like the people we serve. We have no LGBTQ people. We have no Native American people. We are largely a 30 and under and a 65 and over population. And we are very sorely underrepresented in those two demographics. It's about representation. We have a very, very competent legislative staff who help us figure out the rules. It's not about experience. It's about a desire to represent and to care about your community. So if anybody wants to run, email me. I will help you run. You do not need experience to run. And finally, before my question for Mr. Nugent, is that statistically, and you can look this up, I learned it in my master's program, that incumbent women are very successful. It is true. Incumbents largely get reelected, and incumbent women especially to city council, because it is a very poorly paid job, and women are willing and forced to work for wages that they can't live on. Finally, in your comment, I have a question for you, Mr. Nugent. You mentioned that you received no emails about this, so it must not matter. I will say that, and I heard it, I can replay it for you, because you did say you received no emails for this. No emails. So clearly it's not an issue that's important to City Council. What about the ceasefire resolution where we got 100 emails in favor? What about the criminalization of houselessness that we received hundreds of emails saying, please don't do this for so many reasons? Why do we get to pick when emails matter and when they don't?
Ms. Jordan, I didn't say that we didn't receive, you gonna let me answer, or are you just gonna sit down and, I did not say that we didn't receive emails, so it's not important. What I said was the comment being made that we're not giving the public the opportunity to talk about it is ridiculous, because it was publicly noticed 2 weeks ago. We talked about it in committee. It's been in the news. It's been on at least 2 members' social medias with good followings that's been engaged with. And we then, because of that, haven't seen emails of people ground swelling up and saying, you guys should be taking up on this. So nuance matters, details matter. And as for the rest of your comments, we have to take each issue individually and we have to vote how we think is important at that time. But in all of those, we got emails on every side of those issues. And you're shaking your head, and that's fine, because again, you get to have your own opinions, but we have to then take all that information in and say, does this make sense? Does it make sense to give the power of this body the voice for this, or is that helping the community, or is it not? And those are the decisions we have to make. And I know that you asked me a question and you won't look at me while I'm trying to answer it, but that's fine. So, no, I'm good.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that response. I'm also going to reiterate what Councilor Cheryl said, which is let's take it down a notch, folks. All right, now we're going to move to the next question, which I believe is Councilor Vasika, or statement, comment.
Thank you. I just wanted to politely defend my colleague, Mr. Nugent, because I was subject to a political action committee donation in 2019 that I had no idea about, because you're not supposed to know about those because they come in from an outside source with all the handlings of outside people that you are not allowed to know about or collude with. So I just wanted to let that be on the record that, I mean, mine was substantially lower than the amount that Mr. Nugent had, but he hadn't, from what I know, he had nothing to do with it. And even though that we disagree on a lot of things, I just needed to stand up for him, because that type of this misnomer is not productive to the conversation. And just to put it on the record, there have been Native Americans in 2019 that ran for election, people who are part of the LGBTQ community that ran for election, and people just disagree with their policies, so they just did not win. And even though I supported some of those in the past. So it's just, it's for the election, and that's the way that the people vote. So I don't think that that's... I don't think that that is a reason to get angry with the people that are in office at the moment, because they won the election. And speaking as someone who barely hung on as an incumbent, I think that it's, I just think that we are getting off of, I think that we're just trying to pull, I don't know how to properly say this. I think that we're making more of this than it needs to be, and this should be a civil discussion. And I would, I am going to be in favor of my colleague's motion to put on the public hearing, but I do agree with a lot of my colleagues on the reasons for and the reasons against having term limits. I just think that we need to keep this civil, and I would really appreciate keeping a civil conversation. And I apologize I'm not there in person tonight. This would have been a great night to be there in person. Thank you.
Councilor Vasika, thank you. And your comments wrap up our council parliamentary debate. We will take this to a roll call vote. Oh, okay, they just popped up again. And Councilor Anderson, go right ahead.
Sorry, thanks so much. I have discovered that if you put when you click on the button and if you keep it hovered, your mouse hovered over it, it will unclick sometimes. So the technology gremlins are real. Appreciate everything that the council folks have said. And I think that the issue that the proponents of this are continuing to highlight is that we've never not set a public hearing. Well, that's actually not true. We've tabled things that then never got to a public hearing. So that is not accurate. And that isn't us trying to subvert democracy or not hear from the people, because this is not an issue that people are clamoring to have a discussion about. And when we have public meetings, there are staff who are here, there are police officers who are here, there are a whole host of things that go into us having a public hearing. And so to say that, you know, oh, it's just simple, you have a public hearing, well, that's not just as simple as some make it sound out to be. And I had the opportunity to run in 2017 and 2021, which were the same years that Mayor Engen ran. And he lost my ward both times. I never once heard anyone say anything about term limits. It was, they didn't like his policies, they didn't whatever. And those are legit arguments to make, and the type of discussion that we have at the hyper local level, which is what city council is. I do not in any way, shape, or form think that incumbency on city council is an advantage, because most people have no idea who I am, and that's okay. I go out and I knock on thousands of doors, talk to my constituents, but you know, I can sit at a coffee shop. I actually literally was sitting there with someone and they're going, how many people know who you are here? I'm like, nobody. And that's fine. So it's not the same equating it to a presidency or something at a much higher level, the governor of the state of Montana. Those are not accurate. And the other thing, I do not believe that this is being brought forth in good faith. I think that the agendas for why this is have sort of shown through. And the number of 12 is arbitrary. The state legislature is 8, but the other thing with the state legislature is you can switch chambers every 8 years. So it's not you can only be a state legislator for 8 years. It's you can only be in a certain chamber for 8 years. They can still be there as long as they want, as long as their constituents will elect them. And so that was used as one of the reasons for this. A local government study. This is exactly the type of thing the local government study is supposed to look at. It's not that there's a checklist that they have, this box of only certain things that they can talk about. In term limits, council, number of representatives, wards, all of those things. And it's all interconnected, which is why it should be looked at in a holistic fashion and not just arbitrarily brought forward because of, for reasons that have not well been articulated. I also agree with Mr. Nugent in the terms of my ward mate, who I respect and we agree and disagree, was very vocal on this on social media. Haven't heard from another person in my ward about this. That is not the only measure in which we decide things, but it is a factor in that consideration. And to come to, once again, to the defense of my fellow council member, it has been said over and over again about the situation in regards to that. And the fact that it keeps coming up really, I think shows that there are agendas and it's not just facts and figures that are driving some of these decisions here on council. So with that, I will not be in support. But if the public wants to sign a petition, excited for that conversation. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, you bet, Councilor Anderson. All right, folks, we're going to wrap this up. Councilor Carlino, I see that your hand is raised. Is there something that you'd like to add that you have not already spoke to? And I'd like you to make sure that it is new comments, that we're not just repeating comments this evening, okay?
I do feel like there was some comments pointed at me there, so it'd be great to respond and just clarify some things, if that's okay.
Sure, let's make sure we're, yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any council members are in this job to make money, and that's not what I was trying to say. I do think that Missoula voters should get to decide whether or not we have term limits, and I don't think that the PAC can directly donate to a candidate, but I do believe that PACs can donate to a candidate to help their cause, which is making money off of the real estate industry, and put that money towards supporting a candidate, but they cannot donate directly to that candidate. So I do want to clarify that they did not donate directly to Councilman Nugent, but rather donated to the cause of getting him elected as a separate PAC that you also were a lobbyist for at one point. So I did want to make that clarification that PACs legally cannot.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take that. So Councillor Carlino, what is your comment to wrap us up on this agenda item? I'm going to steer you back to what these recommended motions are. Let's get this done. Come on. We have some more business to do tonight.
So on this agenda item, this is a vote to set 2 public hearings to allow the voters of Missoula to weigh more in on this topic. And if City Council passes it, then the voters of Missoula could decide for themselves rather than council members deciding for them whether or not they'd like to have term limits for their elected. So with that, I'm happy to close out.
Great. Thank you very much. That is a wrap, folks. We are not going to take any other council comments, and we will send it to you, Claire, to do a roll call vote on these motions. Let's take them separately, please.
All right, we are going to take them separately, and just like the last one, you're going to vote on the plain meaning of the motion. So we are voting on setting a public hearing on March 24th, 2025 on an ordinance submitting the question of whether to amend the city's charter to adopt term limits for the positions of city council member to the electors of the city of Missoula. A yes vote is in favor of setting the public hearing. A no vote is in opposition of setting the public hearing. Beginning with Becerra.
No.
Campbell.
Yes.
Carlino.
Yes.
Jones.
No.
Jordan.
Yes.
Nelson.
No.
Nugent.
No.
Savage.
No.
Cheryl.
No.
Sika.
Yes.
And Anderson.
No.
That's 4 in favor, 7 opposed, and that motion fails. Continuing to the next motion. Again, we're voting on the plain meaning of the motion. We are voting on setting a public hearing on March 24th, 2025 on an ordinance submitting the question of whether to amend the city's charter to adopt term limits for the position of mayor of the city to the electors of the city of Missoula. A vote in favor, yes, is for setting a public hearing. Beginning with Campbell.
Yes.
Carlino.
Yes.
Jones.
No. No.
Jordan.
Yes.
Nelson.
No.
Nugent.
No.
Savage.
No.
Cheryl.
No.
Masika.
Yes.
Anderson.
No.
And Becerra.
No.
Again, that's 4 in favor, 7 opposed. That motion fails.
Okay. Thank you very much. That wraps up those agenda items. We'll now move on to a lighter topic, the state legislature updates. So I'll turn it over to Jessica Miller for that, please. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Jessica Miller with Central Services. First of all, I wanted to make a couple of procedural notes here at the legislature. So we have a couple of deadlines that are coming up. This Wednesday is the deadline to introduce general bills, and so that's the bulk of the legislation that is going through falls into that category. Bills with appropriations and things that are referendums and resolutions have a later introduction timeline, but general bills must be introduced by this Wednesday. And so what that means is that we actually have a lot of legislation coming through this week, and that's moving very quickly. March 7th is the transmittal deadline for general bills, and that's when they have to move from one house to the other. Okay, so a few highlights on bills that came up last week and this coming week. First of all, Councilwoman Cheryl, I apologize. I realized I did not get this information to you from the last meeting, but House Bill 490 is the one that Councilwoman Cheryl brought up at our last meeting. That is revising civil liability laws, and it changes regulations for wildfires and energy facilities, and what energy facilities would be responsible for based on what sort of wildfire plans they have in place. It doesn't directly affect the city of Missoula, but we did put it down as an oppose, basically a rudimentary plan by an energy company kind of resolves them of liability on that. There are a few Medicaid bills that are going through, and these sort of generally help us meet some of our housing goals with a lot of the things in that package. SB 187 we're supporting. That one is for behavioral health. House Bill 245, which is the HELP Act and workforce development. That one has a hearing tomorrow. House Bill 386 allows for people to remain on continuous Medicaid, and that one is tomorrow as well. So we're speaking on a couple of those. Senate Bill 334 is one that we're opposing, and that would limit access to Medicaid expansion for certain vulnerable groups. And finally, Senate Bill 62 would have provided a phase out for Medicaid expansion, and that one failed on second reading. Those items can still be resurrected, but at the moment it appears to be dead. Moving on to another topic, we have House Bill 482, providing that local government elections be partisan. We are opposing that one. That one was up for hearing last week, has not been voted yet on committee, or voted within the committee yet. House Bill 310, establishing a grant program to increase community shelter capacity for homeless population. That one had a hearing either last week or today, I can't recall. And the testimony on that has gone very well, so we have hopes for that one. House Bill 505, revising laws on Montana Housing Infrastructure Revolving Loan Fund. I believe that's the one we used for Rivara funding, although I may be misspeaking on that. We're supporting that one. Staff will be testifying tomorrow in favor of that one. We had Senate Bill 204 and Senate Bill 205, both of which would have made it much more difficult for us to have voted levies. Both of those died in committee last week. House Bill, and then House Bill 635. This is one of a couple of bills that are targeting DEI types of things. 635 would revise human rights laws to prohibit diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And Mayor Davis is going to be there to testify in opposition to that on Friday. And Friday at the legislature is also Municipal Day. And so that is when there are cities and towns from all over the state who are going to be gathering in the Capitol and doing some lobbying for that as well. And that's my update. I'm available for questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Miller. Any questions for Jessica? Not seeing any. Yes, yeah, Councilor Jones.
Could you just say the topic of 204 and 205 again? It's a lot to hang on to.
So 204 and 205 Senate bills, those were both regarding property tax levies. One of them, I think, would require our levies to sunset every 10 years, and we'd have to go back to, so things like the fire levy, where we're trying to pay for an entire engine company, that becomes difficult. So one was a sunset, and I believe the other gave us minimum turnout threshold requirements.
And they both
so,
went.
Yep, and both of those failed, or died in committee.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Councilor Vasika.
Thanks. Those two, 204 and 205, did come out of the Property Tax Task Force, which I was a part of, and I was a big supporter of those. The one that was going to sunset levies and bonds after 10 years, it was either going to put them up for a vote or sunset them. So if voters wanted to ignite them, then they would have the ability to, just to make sure that things could. If something happened in the 90s and wanted to still be something that we wanted to hash out in the future, then we would have the ability to. But as we all know, that a lot of bonds and levies that are on our, actually 100% of them are voted in perpetuity, and perpetuity is forever. So sometimes things are not always needed for forever. So I was sad to see those two die in committee. I'm hoping to see them again in the future. But I just wanted to point that out. And I also wanted to thank Jessica and all the staff for keeping an eye on these, all these legislative bills, because so many things happen so quickly in these 3 months of the legislature. So I really wanted to thank everybody for paying attention for all of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just curious where the legislature is at this point with Senate Bill 2. Are there any upcoming hearings that have been transferred to a different chamber, or where are we at with that?
So I believe Senate Bill 2 has not been voted in committee yet. Sorry, Counselor, give me just one moment to double check, because my brain is getting full on some of these. So let's see. So it was passed out of committee. Senate Bill 2 passed out of committee. It has not yet come back to the Senate floor for second reading for that floor vote. And so that's just a matter of checking the agendas daily and seeing if they're going to put it on the floor for their floor vote.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Mayor, if I may, I'd like to make a motion that our city lobbyist change the position in opposition to Senate Bill to support of Senate Bill 2.
Okay, so I'm going to look to that motion.
And I'll speak to it when appropriate.
Okay, that sounds fine. So that motion is on the floor, and I'm looking to Mr. Bickle to, we'll go ahead and take, if that motion's on the floor, we'll go through the regular procedural process of public comment. We'll get council comment, and then there'll be an opportunity for Councilor Campbell to speak to his motion. Correct? Motion is on the floor? Okay, all right, so this is on Senate Bill 2. Any questions for Councilor Campbell before we go ahead and open up public comment? Yes?
Why are you advocating for this change?
So I'm making my comment now, or however you...
It is council questions, so yeah, questions been posed to you, go right ahead.
Okay, yeah, I think Senate Bill 2 is a reasonable effort to put some side rails on TIF that's been lacking in local government for quite some time. You know, my experience on council, even before council, shows that TIF from time to time has gone above what I feel is its intended purpose. I feel tax increment financing does have a role certainly in local government, but I think we look to some of the uses we've had recently. You know, most recently look at the $5+ million purchase of Southgate Triangle and the money that was allocated for that. And meanwhile, we have a system in place where, you know, funds are being reallocated, redistributed to police, to fire, to law enforcement, to schools, particularly schools that are being, I feel, shortchanged from projects that are within a TIF district. And I think everyone here got the Q&A I had with Mr. Bickle about some of the concerns I had with regard to the impacts of TIF upon schools, particularly using Rivera as an example. You know, the impact that would have and the burden it would have on schools going forward, students that may be at a result of residential development within the urban renewal district, and the inability of school districts to capture revenue from there, particularly where a city owns property that's not being taxed. As we continue to land bank property here within the city. I think, you know, at the sunset of an urban renewal district, as I understand it, schools are going to be pressed to make up the difference for funding within developments that are within that district. And I think, you know, we have a situation here where we've seen over the years situations where schools are, you know, requesting levies to, you know, voluntary levies on the ballot to pay for improvements, pay for facilities, you know, pay for whatever. And I think that's a symptom of the problem of money being not properly distributed to begin with from schools, and a problem, a vicious cycle being exacerbated with regards to properly funded schools, and the money that's frankly been withheld with schools, just using schools as an example, within confines of projects and development that happen within the urban renewal district. I feel Senate Bill 2 kind of levels the field in a sense that, the taxpayers get a break from this perpetual cycle that I see taking place again and again, and the tax base being, diverted in such a way that it necessitates these levies and other means of increasing revenue for schools and whatnot to, support themselves. That's a short version.
Okay, Councilor Anderson, follow-up question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for that explanation. Oh, sorry. So I was like, what? Thanks for the explanation. You highlighted several times the correlation that you see between school levies and tax increment financing districts. Do other communities, have they been levying for schools as well? Or is it a singularly Missoula problem? Is Missoula the only community that's asking for school levies?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Nope. That's it.
Okay. So we're in the question period, and Councilor Nugent.
Thank you, Mayor Davis. Mr. Campbell, I think you misread Mr. Bickle's answer to your question on school funding, so I'm going to ask him to explain that a little bit more. Because my understanding, and when we do a disbursement, for instance, the schools, when the money is dispersed back to them, can't spend it because they have their funding is determined by a formula at the state. So what they can collect is spread out in the district, but I would like Mr. Bickle to maybe speak to that, because I think what you just said isn't completely accurate on how school funding works. So I understand the point you're making.
Mr. Bickle?
Dale Bickle, Chief Administrative Officer. So while I'm not an expert in school financing, the way their property tax limitations work are different than other local governments, such as the city or county. And the formula that Councilor Nugent talked about is actually based more on enrollment than anything. And so the school is allowed under the formula, and I'm oversimplifying it, as the enrollment grows, they are allowed to levy the funds necessary to fund theirs based on that. So how it applies to a tax increment district, there isn't a direct effect on most of the school levies because of that enrollment-based limitation. And also when schools, and because of that, when schools get a remittance, like there was in the budget last year, they actually have to reduce their levies. They don't get the benefit of that remittance from MRA and their pro rata share of the mills. They actually have to reduce their levies, and the same thing applies under current law when the district sunsets. They don't get the benefit of new revenues. They have to adjust their levies in accordance with that formula.
Okay, please go right ahead. You think it's on?
Sorry.
Oh, there we go.
My mic might not have been on. I won't make my joke again. My understanding is that one of the many differences between educational funding and local municipality funding is that we have the caps like 1/2 the rate of inflation over the last 3 years, but we can go within the full authority of our spending there, whereas schools have the formula that comes from the state, and then if they want a little bit more, they're authorized by state law to go to the voters and ask for it. So that levy request isn't because they're in a TIF district or they're losing money from TIF, rather it's that the state formula for funding is not as much as they need. Is that correct?
Yes, that's how I understand it as well.
Great, thank you for your questions. Councilor Jones.
I've got a question for Dale. We're in questions, right?
Yeah, absolutely, we are, you bet.
So
SB 2 really restructures how TIF would work, and could you speak to that? The topic of how newly taxable would ultimately revert to the city in the long run, this drastically changes that and really takes away the incentive to even have tax increment financing. And we saw that with the Roseburg annexation, that is on hold until this is handled. But could you articulate that, how this changes the newly taxable issue as revenue in the long run?
Yes. So SB 2 in and of itself doesn't actually change how tax increment works when the district is in place. It doesn't change any of the current mechanisms related to the types of uses or anything else, or our support of things like workforce housing or acquisition of lands. That doesn't change under SB 2. However, what does change is what happens with the tax base that is incentivized by a new development when that tax increment just expires. Under current law, the development under current law, back to when the TIF is set, that there is a base value that's frozen in the TIF, and then in new development after that base year is set is captured by that tax increment district in order to fund infrastructure projects. When that as that grows, that all of that increment is captured in that tax increment district. When that district sunsets, that tax base then transfers from that increment district to the taxing jurisdictions on the pro rata share of the mills. And newly taxable is the mechanism by which that transfer occurs. So that means essentially for the city, that tax base that's been captured in that tax increment district is then available for our general operations. And in order to do that, in order to amend essentially our property tax limitation, that transfer has to occur. So the total number of mills on that transfer doesn't actually change to a taxpayer. Their tax bill doesn't change because it goes into newly taxable property. It does increase it increases our property tax limit. So what would happen under SB 2? Our limitation doesn't change, and we don't get to capture that value that we were hoping to count on to help with our services. That goes away, and we functionally have to lower our mills.
Okay.
Please.
Right, so that last point, I just want to make sure we're clear on that. So with SB 2, we don't capture that newly taxable. So our tax base is at a low amount then, yet we have a need to provide more services based on development that's happening, and that's completely upside down then. So we are not incentivized to do any of this. And Roseburg, the annexation with Roseburg, they hit pause. We hit pause along with them because of that scenario.
And I think that it's that kind of future risk that council has to weigh now, related particularly to a large project like Roseburg, where it's over 235 acres of developable land, could contain hundreds of new homes and other development, and under SB 2, we're not going to get new revenue to be able to operate there. So we have to, and each kind of TIF district is going to have a different sort of risk with it. A small TIF district like Riverfront Triangle, that might be an example of one that SB 2 may not impact, and it's kind of up to council on to assess that. Is that okay to move? We think we can move forward without having those future revenues to support that. But large tracts, URD3 or even North Reserve Scott Street, the way it is, that are fairly sizable, are some things that we have to consider that, what I would call that risk of, are we going to be able to keep up with the level of service requirements?
Okay, all right, you bet, absolutely. And Councilor Nugent.
Thanks. Just a quick follow-up to that line of questioning, Mr. Bickle. Because our general fund growth is capped at half the rate of inflation, as services get more expensive, growth as far as like the city growing is really the only way to keep up with with funding things like a growing fire department and stuff like that. We've seen obviously the recent fire levy and stuff that, we're not immune to that. There's obviously special districts as well. If you look up like the broader definition of tax increment financing, isn't one of the whole reasons that tool exists is to grow the tax base? Isn't that why the tool exists?
From my perspective, I think the city has been really successful in driving private investment in areas that were essentially found to be blighted under the law and do that. And I think there is, the map on MRA's website that highlights all the private investment that has gone in downtown. Like all of the big investment has been in, private investment has been in our URDs, and there's been essentially one big project outside of URDs in the downtown. And to me, that highlights the power of the tool.
So it's our only economic tool that we really have at the local level. My last question, you mentioned Roseburg, and because the great debate, and we keep getting emails from Senator Hertz on this, and I've thought about responding to try and ask some questions, because I don't know if we understand this the same way, but you mentioned Roseburg, and Senator Hertz is concerned, and I believe he said in the hearing that if this passes and cities don't see TIF as a continued value, we shouldn't be serving on city council. But my question to you is, like, if this passes and we say, yep, we're gonna use this economic tool to try to encourage development in the Roseburg site that meets our goals, the taxpayers are kind of agreeing to share the burden of creating services there, but we're saying if that can't be newly taxable, that we're agreeing to spread that burden forever. Is that an accurate understanding of the point he's trying to make?
I think so. I mean, I don't want to speak for Senator Hertz. I think he did a point in, he sent an email back to council, I think earlier today, that talked about the taxpayer burden and the continued use of the half rate of inflation, and that's going to be on a higher amount. I mean, I think that was one of his points because of that new development. But I would say one thing that we are asking, I think you're correct in that we're going to, because of that, the rest of the community is going to share in the services for that district. But I would add that also because of our property tax limitations, we're going to have a general lowering of the level of service citywide because of the new development there.
Thanks.
You're welcome. You bet. Next question, Councilor Carlino.
Are we on comments too, or just questions?
We are just on questions before I move to public comment. I'm going to follow the same routine that we do with our hearings, if that's okay. There are other agenda items, so if it's not comment, then I'll go ahead and wait for that. I'll go back to public, I'll bring it to public comment, then there'll be opportunity for parliamentary debate. Okay. All right, any other council questions before I open it up to public comment on this motion? Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had some follow-up questions from Mr. Bickle. So, as far as the increment that builds year to year, when URD is in place, how much of that goes to schools from year to year? How much of that increment is benefited by the schools?
So I guess I would answer that question is that, for the majority of school levies, TIF districts are neutral to schools. They still are the opportunity to get the same revenues based on the enrollment figures that the formula, that the state formula calculates.
But to do that, or for them to accomplish that, they would have to do an assessment of properties outside of a URD, is that correct?
So what would happen in order to do that? They may have to use, because of the portion of the total tax base that's in the TIF, they would use more mills to get the same amount of revenue.
Okay, so and in turn, of course, use more mills, so that would shift more taxpayer tax burden theoretically.
Theoretically, yes.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So year to year, URD will collect a tax increment that the city maintains. Could the city at any point decide to just do a remittance to a school or recalculation of a URD to, assuming all bonds are paid for within a URD, to say, okay, let's in essence cut it off and then go forward with the remittance to the schools, to what have you, within their URD to satisfy their needs that way?
Yes, the remittance process, there's a little bit of a nuance in state law, if I'm remembering this correctly, that says it's, excess tax increment dollars that isn't restricted for debt service or other properties. So yes, but what has to do is that it has to be remitted on the same pro rata share of mills. So it not only goes to we can't remit it just to the schools, it has to go to all of the jurisdictions, the city, county, all the taxing jurisdictions. And I remind you that it's not new revenue to the schools, it's an offset against the formula.
Okay. And I guess isn't there a theoretical question? And theoretically, if such a remittance would take place, a school district may decide that they don't need to reallocate additional mills for the population at large if they were to be a benefit of a remittance.
Yeah, well, in fact, they are required to. They have to. If they get a remittance in most of their levies, they have to lower their mill rate.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Thanks for asking those clarifying questions. Councilor Vasika.
Yeah, thanks. This brought up a question that I had a couple of years ago regarding the West Side Lanes, the bowling alley. In 2023, the total tax bill for West Side Lanes was over $77,000, but over $53,000 of that went to Urban Renewal District 211C. So that's an insane amount of money that goes directly into the Urban Renewal District. I guess, how is that not taking away from the schools and the fire in the city?
So in the school example, the schools are allowed to get the same amount of revenue they would have received whether or not the tax increment district exists there. And so those value and improvement increases are by policy have been kept in that district. For the city, yes, that's true. And what previous councils have determined is that investment in keeping those investments in those tax increment districts and to be able to spur that private investment to grow the tax base over the long run is worth that short-term piece where it's calculated. And short-term meaning, I mean, these TIF districts cannot be long-lived, but in order to incent that private investment that has been deemed to be worth it. And so I just want to remind everyone that in terms of total tax base, it's about 10% of our total tax base that's in increment district. So it's a meaningful bit, but it's not the it's the minority by far.
Thank you. I'm all finished with my questions.
Okay. Great. Thank you. You bet. And I see that Councilor Campbell, your hand is up again. Was that from previous? Okay. Okay, great. And Councilor Nugent, another question?
And just one quick follow-up for Dale. On the kind of line of comment you were just talking about with trying to explain the educational funding. So when the next urban renewal district sunsets, the school can't collect any more money. So in theory, school taxes might go down a little bit because that amount of money that's been collected will be spread around more people. So in essence, part of what Senator Hertz maybe doesn't completely understand about this will be happening either way.
Well, I guess I would say that the way that SB 2 would apply to the cities and counties the way it does to schools today. except that they don't have the limitation we have on our half the rate of inflation.
That makes sense. So but the entire increment, like the entire increment that right now is going in the MRA into that URD district, it doesn't all go back into the city because the school part would go and offset. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
All right. Have we answered all questions for the time being before we move to public comment on this item? Any other questions? Okay. All right. So public comment on the motion on the floor, which is to change the city's position on Senate Bill 2. Currently, Senate Bill 2, the city opposes Senate Bill 2. And Councilor Campbell's motion is to change the city's position to support Senate Bill 2. Any public comment on that?
Where does the school come into the TIF district when it's not a valuable tax revenue resource? I thought the TIF district is an investment on a return for a better tax return to feed the budget. We should send a message to the Senate to modify the TIF district for the return of investment for a tax increase. Didn't we have a discussion on this several months ago on the TIF deal, on the return of taxes to feed the budget? And another thing, I'm not hearing how can we increase the cash flow into this city and county besides Bonner. That big piece of property should be invested in a cash investment on return of income to this city instead of Walmart and Amazon taking it to their big corporate offices. We need a cash flow of income to support possibly maybe some employees that come to Missoula, because I don't think there's enough employees in this city to support a business of cash flow. I tuned into Wisconsin Public Radio. They're giving $1,000 tax credit for people to come and work in Wisconsin. I don't think if Wisconsin can't get employees, Missoula couldn't.
Thank you, Mr. Spitzmacher. Any other public comment on this motion? Not seeing any in the room. Is there any online? Okay, I'm not seeing any online. We'll take it back then to council deliberation, and Councilor Vasika, your hand is raised.
Thanks. Since there was a lot of talking about Senator Hertz's email exchange with council, I just thought that I put on the record the last email that Senator Hertz did email all council. It'll take less than a minute. So he wrote, in response to a letter sent to you from Dale Bickle and Ellen Buchanan on a follow-up of an email I sent about Senate Bill 2, Senate Bill 2 does not hinder the servicing of TIF bonds. The TIF does not need a sunset prior to the complete payment of the bond debt. You can keep the TIF in existence and make remittances to local governments and schools while retaining enough money to service the bond. Your choice. As TIFs develop over their lifespan of 35 to 40 years, city services are being provided to those areas under the yearly budget. So fire, law enforcement, safety, road maintenance, park maintenance, etc., are all being provided and are being subsidized by taxpayers outside of the TIF district. Under current law, when a TIF sunsets, then the new property is added to half the rate of inflation to increase your budgeted revenue. Take, for example, URD 3, scheduled to maybe sunset around 2040. The increment currently collects $6.8 million per year in 2023, which allows adding that entire amount to the total revenue of your budget. It increases your base budget the following year by that amount, thus impacting all taxpayers going forward. URD 2 has a current increment of $4.8 million and may sunset in 2031. How large will those increments be when those TIFs sunset? There is no doubt that existing taxpayers are subsidizing TIFs. The bill requires TIF new property to help reduce property taxes for all taxpayers in Missoula. Give your taxpayers a break and help reduce taxes. Senate Bill 2 will not stop TIFs. That will be up to the City Council. Thanks for listening. I just wanted to read that email on the record since we were discussing an email exchange back and forth, just so that we don't accidentally take his words out of context. And that's all I have for comments.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Vasika. Councilor Campbell.
I guess at this point, just make my final comments. Again, I think this is necessary to go in this direction just because of the effects it has on schools and the the amount of tax revenue that's being neglected or that's being withheld. Properties assessed within URDs, the increment that's built to the detriment of the ability of schools to access that money. And to me, as we've heard, it sets up a situation where now schools have to find other means of getting the income they need for their students, particularly if it's exacerbated by residential growth within the existing URD. I think also land banking, they've spoken out against from time to time, and URDs is another issue with pulling tax revenue off the rolls, generally speaking. I think schools have a tough enough time or this current climate to do what they need to run their classrooms, and unfortunately, by means of adding mills for property taxes, or having to go to an extreme such as putting out bond levies repeatedly like they have over the last 10, 15, ongoing 20 years, and exacerbating taxpayers' tax rolls or tax bills from year to year here in the city. I think enough's enough. And, I think what we have here is something that will still allow TIF to be a useful tool in the city. But there'll be some sideboards put in place, and I think it'll still be a useful tool for the city. At the same point, we'd be mindful of taxpayers' contribution, to governmental operations locally.
Okay, thank you for your comments. And Councilor Carlino.
I'm not going to be supportive of this today just because I think, it would restrict our tax revenue too much, and I think TIF is still a helpful tool for the city of Missoula. I do think we're seeing bills like this come through the legislature because of the amount of regulatory power that the Missoula City Council has given away to the MRA board, allowing them to unilaterally spend taxpayer dollars on anything except for when we have to bond or buy or sell land. I think is a huge mistake, and I'm going to continue to try to reverse that and let voters in Missoula vote people in that spend their tax dollars. And I think that's kind of why we're seeing so many bills like this, is because so much power has been given away when it comes to TIF spending. But overall, I think this goes a little bit too far in restricting tax revenue. So I'm okay with our lobbyists still opposing this.
Okay, thank you for your comments. And Councilor Anderson.
Thanks so much, Madam Mayor. I agree with Mr. Carlino that I will not be in support of changing our stance on this. I think that I agree with Mr. Campbell. We are all very concerned about school funding, but I do not think it's simply a Missoula problem. Last year, almost every single AA school district ran a levy, if not multiple levies, and most all A schools. So that's communities like Kalispell and Columbia Falls and Belgrade, and there's all the way down. So there is not an equation, or correlation is not causation in this situation. And I think, as Mr. Bickle has said, even if we were to give in a remittance, it's not like, for example, the budget of the school, for just storytelling purposes here, is $10 million. They get $1 million back. Their budget now is not $11 million. It's still just $10 million because it's based on the size of enrollment. So, and then I think that appreciate Mr. Senator Hertz corresponding back and forth. Yes, that may be the numbers of the total increment within that district, but you have to remember that the city doesn't get that entire amount. And so it's not like if all of a sudden, poof, URD 3 no longer is a URD, that the city is going to see $6 million. We'll see our percentage of what that taxable area is to us. It's about 29-32%, somewhere in there. So it's not a one-for-one. So I think that there's a lot of moving parts. I think there's a lot of things that the legislature could fix that actually would make life easier for folks and more affordable. This, to me, is not one of them, because I'm pretty sure that Ms. Buchanan can give to us the overall economic impact that someplace like, I think of like the Sawmill District, has actually brought to the larger community of Missoula. Yes, at this juncture, if that's in a URD, that's not going directly to the general fund, but the impact that has taxably on all those people who work in that Cognizant building all now live somewhere in Missoula and are paying taxes. The employment and the jobs at the various restaurants, the housing that is there, it is a long-term investment that, yes, ties up the money for a very short term, but Sawmill District will be there well past any of us who are in this room, and will be continuing to generate income and opportunity for Missoula. And I think that's where we are tasked with sometimes doing the hard things now to see the long-term continued payout.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Anderson and Councillor Jones.
I'll be brief. I will not be in support of the motion, Bob. I appreciate the discussion, but I think our tax increment financing program is really our one tool to address so many issues that have need here in Missoula. So I wanted to also just, a lot of the conversation centered around school funding, and I think I've sat through hours and hours on school funding. It is so complicated, more complicated than local government funding. But as Dale referenced, it's not a straight equation of we do a disbursement, they get extra money, and it's all good. They really, with their funding formulas, they don't get to hang on to that money. So it's a pass-through for the most part. But what I wanted to emphasize was over the years, as I have talked with MCPS leadership, and it's been a couple of years, so I'm certainly not speaking for the current superintendent, but many conversations that MCPS really values and supports what our Missoula Redevelopment Agency does. They want sidewalks for kids to walk to school on. They want connector streets for kids to get to school. Putting Marion connected an entire neighborhood with CM Russell, it was very hard for kids to get across Brooks to get to that grade school. That was a huge connector that benefited that school. They want their students housed. There is always a population of students who are homeless, they're unhoused, working on housing, and MCPS is not building housing. That's not their mission. That's fine. But to the degree that the city can facilitate more workforce housing, more low-income housing, getting kids housed is definitely a high value and a priority for MCPS. So I just have heard that over the years and wanted to put that on the floor. This is a multifaceted issue, and this is our one tool in this state to use towards any of these goals. So I'm not in favor of changing our position on SB2.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nugent.
Thank you, Mayor Davis. I would echo Ms. Jones' comments, and I would just add that there are the way the tax system's set up and operating a general fund that can only grow at half the rate of inflation, it sets local governments up to fail. And so then coming back with those rules and knowing that they're in place and saying, we're going to take away the new taxable value on this kind of sacrifice that the voters of Missoula or the residents of Missoula just did for years and years, or any community, I think takes away one of the few tools, because like I mentioned earlier in my questions, that new growth that creates new taxable value is the only way to keep up with ongoing expenses. And you've referenced on the floor, public safety officers' salaries that are in negotiations right now. I mean, like, those things are going up at higher than the rate of inflation. And so we see why we have a roads district and a parks district. But we also recognize that, if the next URD expires and we can plan for that in 6 years or whatever it is, one of our big needs is facility improvements for our police department. And there's nowhere in our budget right now that we can pull from that to bond against. So we've got to figure that out. And that increment expiring gives us an opportunity to plan and say, maybe we can use part of that to bond and pay off instead of going to the voters and saying we need another levy or we need this. That's just one example of we can use the tool smartly to try and look at big ticket items and do something without doing a levy. So I think that I would agree there are sideboards that the legislature could put in place to make TIF spending more efficient. But like a lot of stuff that's happening at the legislature right now, they seem to be trying to fix small issues with sledgehammers that don't take into effect the broader impacts. So I will not be in support of this tonight.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. That looks like that wraps up council deliberation. And so we'll go ahead and take a roll call vote on this motion on the floor.
All right, we are voting on a motion to change the city's official position on Senate Bill 2 regarding TIF allocation from opposing to in favor. Beginning with Carlino.
No.
Jones.
No.
Jordan.
Abstain.
Nelson.
No.
Nugent.
No.
Savage.
No.
Cheryl.
No.
Zika.
Yes.
Anderson.
No.
Becerra.
No.
And Campbell.
Yes.
That vote has 2 in favor, 8 opposed, and 1 abstention, and it fails.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the robust discussion and Q&A session. Is there any other questions on the legislative session or comments before we move on to public comment on items not on the agenda? Anything else on the legislative updates? Okay. All right, thanks again, folks. Appreciate diving into such a complex subject as Montana's property tax structure, and unfortunately, it is painfully complex. I appreciate every opportunity we have to ask questions and get clarity about how it works. All right. Thank you, Ms. Miller, and thank you, Mr. Pickle, for being available for questions. We're going to go ahead and move on to item 11, which is public comment on non-agenda items. Anybody here in the audience wishing to make public comment on non-agenda items tonight? We allow for 3 minutes per public comment. Come on up and identify your name for the record if you would, please. Thank you.
BK Montana again. Well, the dinosaur that still is at Johnson Street. Have we been thinking about what the city's going to do with the dynamics infrastructure? Be grateful those people are not your constituents that vote. You'd really have a conundrum. You thought you'd have problems with the camping ordinances and the problems that are out there. If those were the equivalent of our voting constituency, you'd have real problems. But you need to have that on the burner. It is something that needs to be realized, an opportunity. And I was listening to PR this morning. I forget what country had 85% voter turnout. That would terrorize some of our constituency with 85% of the turnout. Well, I'm riding around on the old public transit. The roads are looking like heavy dollar signs for repairing, and they look questionable, and some craters are developing. How well is the city gonna manage that problem? And I've got to make one great comment. You guys are a great group of people. Thank you for bringing up a controversial subject. The hornets really buzz and some of them bit.
Thank you, Mr. Spitzmacher. Other public comment on items not on the agenda tonight? Come on up.
I missed the ordinance.
Hi, again, Ann Adams, Ward 2. I wanted to address an incident that presumably happened over the weekend near Jacobs Island Dog Park. They were saying a woman named Danielle Ehrlich and her dog Bamba, who presumably drowned in the river. Earlier in the week, there was a dog named Bear who went under the water in front of his owners and was unable to be recovered. As of this morning, a large group of community members in Missoula have signed a petition to increase signage regarding the risks this park, as its current design imposes during the winter and early spring and summer with the high runoff and high levels. As of this afternoon, I have read that Missoula Parks and Recreation, in response to one email that I know of, there could have been more at this time from citizens, and the response is that they're actively working to improve signage. At this point, I ask that the City Council, however it coordinates with Parks and Rec and Animal Control, considers the policy changes that may need to take place to limit park access in the winter, but also during the spring and early summer months when there are added hazards in the river in addition to the high water levels. I also want to acknowledge that on Saturday, March 1st, or 2nd, this Saturday, March 2nd, I apologize, I will have to clarify, it is this upcoming Saturday at 6:30 p.m. at the walking bridge between Albertsons and the Jacobs Island Dog Park. There is a community-led candlelight vigil for Janet and her dog, and it will be implemented as a memorial for the other dogs and humans who have lost their lives in the past. And so at this point, that's my ask of City Council, is to investigate how practically these incidents can be prevented in the future. That's all I have.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Adams. Other public comment tonight? Not seeing any here in the audience. Is there any public comment on items not on the agenda for folks that are online? Okay, I am not seeing any public comment online. So we'll go ahead and shift to mayor comments and council comments, and I'll keep it brief. I also want to acknowledge the presumed drowning of Danielle Ehrlich. This is not something that is that's still under investigation, and her dog Bamba as well. I want to acknowledge the hard work of our law enforcement and public safety officers, both across the city, the county, volunteer search and rescue, K-9 units. They were hard at work immediately upon receiving this report, and have acted professionally and respectfully. They've been in touch with the Dannett's family. And I will confirm that Ms. Adams, the Parks and Rec Department, has worked to get signage up at Jacobs Island. And it's important to say that while folks are interested in searching for Bamba because there was hope that maybe the dog survived. The police did confirm today that there is no physical evidence that shows that the dog retreated from the river. And so we're all asking the public to please not search along the riverbank. These are incredibly dangerous conditions. They are this year and they are every year. They are along the Clark Fork River, the Rattlesnake, the Grant Creek, along our irrigation canals. We live in a community filled with water and other natural hazards. And we implore the public, not only at this time out of a desire to help, to please be safe, but all the time. We often see footprints crossing over the river in places that, quite frankly, are astounding. And this goes for not only our residents of our community, but visitors. We will do what we can to make sure that folks are safe. That said, we have a long winding river through our community. We can't sign everywhere, and we need folks to be conscientious of what's happening out there. The other thing that I will implore people is that, you know, I'm a dog owner, and I can only imagine what that must feel like when you see your loved one potentially go into the water and you want to rescue that animal. We have dog parks in our community that are away from rivers, and I would encourage folks to tell our friends and our visiting friends about that, both at MRL Park, the Fort Missoula. We have locations of dog parks that are fenced and they're safe and they're away from water hazards. This is something that is incredibly sad. The city takes it very seriously. We have gotten signage up around Jacobs Island in particular. It's a wild park. The river flows through it. And we just appreciate everybody's conscientiousness and their hearts. This community, again, showed up beautifully in so many ways, and I just want to say thank you, not only to all the residents here, but again to our first responders who have been out there doing their best to do this. At first, a search and now a recovery. So thank you, and with that, I'll go ahead and pass it to council comments, and I'll start with you, Councilor Campbell.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Condolences do go out to this lady's family and friends. I'm sure are out there. It's such an unfortunate circumstance. Obviously, kudos to our search and rescue and local law enforcement and emergency services for handling that situation. And, you know, it's something, you know, I've seen similar to this in the past. Unfortunately, you know, from time to time this happens. And quite frankly, I kind of wonder if maybe we should, you know, look at some sort of closure during certain events for that dog park, being that we have other alternatives available. I guess it's just something to have a conversation about down the line, you know, as we would close Mount Jumbo during, you know, winter, you know, snow events, you know, for a season because of avalanche danger. Maybe this is something, just a limited circumstance to entertain, but it just came to mind. I just want to say shout out to Missoula Fire, Missoula PD. I had occasion a lot myself, Councilman Nugent and Councilwoman Anderson to attend the Citizens Local Government Academy last week, and this was the public safety section of that. Both had folks there from the fire department and police department talking about, you know, what they do and how they serve our community, and they had some open house demonstrations of different equipment and stuff that they had. Fire department had a Jaws of Life demonstration with their extrication tools, and police had different SWAT gear and demonstrations set up with K9. And so it was very educational for the public at large. It was a little bit of a blast from the past for me to be out there and interact with those folks. So good interaction there, and I'm glad that's something that, you know, the city has on a yearly basis put out there, and just have a way of folks to come in and just, you know, gain better insight as to how local government works. So obviously that's something that, you know, we should sustain going forward. And that's all the comments I had tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Jordan?
I'll pass, thanks.
Okay, you bet. And Councilor Sherrill?
Yeah, I will echo the mayor's comments and Mr. Campbell's about just sending out my condolences to the friends and family. And it's sad day. I can't imagine if that was someone that I loved.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll just very quickly also add my condolences, and as a fellow dog mom, I can't imagine how horrific that had to have been, and it's a loss of life for a lot more people than just, dogs are family too. And so it's a tough situation for sure. And I appreciate the comments about other dog parks that can be utilized during the time where the river, it looks peaceful and lovely on top, but it is still a river with a current below. So just be mindful of all of that, and be safe and pet your puppies.
Thank you, Councilor Anderson. Councilor Carlino? Okay. Councilor Jones?
Yeah, I first of all just wanted to say my heart goes out to the family of the young woman who we think drowned, and it's just a heartbreaking situation. So I think everybody's, this is a real tough one, and we're sending our condolences. There is another topic that I wanted to just briefly discuss. The federal government is cutting a lot of federal employees right now. And we're starting to get the news in Montana as to folks who have been cut from different agencies. I think the biggest headline has been the Forest Service, and 340 to 360. I've heard different numbers. And it looks like there's going to be more cuts coming. There's also a lot of federal grants, science research. I think I looked it up. It looks like we have close to 19,000 federal employees in Montana. As these cuts happen, they're going to have a huge impact on Montana, not just those individuals, but our state, our economy, the services that are provided. I am frustrated because of the way they're going about it. I think government is in the service business, and it behooves government to provide good service. So if there have to be cuts, and that's something we discussed with the city of Missoula, it needs to be thoughtful, it needs to be intentional, it needs to be as strategic and as effective as possible in terms of having the least impact on the services we provide, but making those budgets work. So it is frustrating to watch the federal dynamic. But also this is going to have some, I read the entire article in the Missoulian. It was a really long one. But the impact on our economy, when we start pulling back on recreation services, there's going to be a huge impact on our economy, and it's just multi-layered. So I think I understand the concept that if our debt is too big, much bigger than our GDP, we need to start figuring out how to make our government work better at a federal level, but having thoughtful, strategic cuts. It's not what I'm seeing right now, and I'm worried, so I think folks need to contact our federal representatives, because that's who needs to advocate for us in this situation. And I think that door is open to contacting them. They do work for the people of Montana, so I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Councilor Jones. Agreed. All right, Councilor Savage.
I'll pass.
Okay. Councilor Becerra?
Pass, thank you.
And Councilor Melson.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to echo the condolences my colleagues have shared, and also wanted to take a second to recognize the invaluable role that our federal government plays, our federal employees play in keeping our community safe, our public lands accessible, and our economy stable. These firings have not only disrupted critical service delivery, but also left families in our community struggling to make ends meet, including several families that I'm close friends with. It's just reckless, and I would argue it's driven more by political ideology than genuine effort to improve government efficiency. And my heart goes out to everyone who's been affected, the nonprofits, the state agencies, the local government departments, and all the people that are, trying to figure out what their next move is going to be. So, keeping you in my thoughts.
All right, thank you, Councilor Melson. Councilor Nugent.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I share the condolences that everybody else mentioned. Just very tragic event and some tragic kind of reminders and certainly things to think about, which I appreciate the public comments and the emails we've been getting as well. Mr. Campbell mentioned the public safety night at the local government academy. And one of the things that was I enjoyed seeing was the new, I guess it's about 2 years old now, the crisis negotiation team van. And I got to spend some time with the officers who run that. And I really appreciated the thought and the care that goes into that. And it's one of those tools that our police department has that really is designed to give a better probability of having a non-tragic outcome to very serious events. Mental health issues, people barricaded into properties, and the van that the previous version of this council approved the purchase of and has been put together is state of the art. And some of the technology they use is actually from companies right here in Missoula. So it was just rewarding to kind of hear people so dedicated to serving Missoula and trying to improve outcomes. And I think that's something that we should be proud of. I also want to echo the comments that Ms. Jones and Mr. Nelson made. And I want to say that I think we all believe in efficiency and that there are ways to get there. I've seen comments comparing what's going on now to what the Clinton administration did. And I just want to say that it's not the same. Clinton administration spent 18 plus months kind of studying and evaluating government, and then they did eliminate positions, which we've seen from time to time in government. But they went about it in a thoughtful manner, and not everything was perfect at that time either, and not everything that administration did I agreed with. That was also the last time the federal government had a balanced budget. So I think that anybody trying to make those comparisons, it's not the same. And I want to say that this implication that somehow if you work for the public, whether it's local government, state government, federal government, that you are not putting in the same hard work that the private sector puts in is bullshit. And sorry for the language, but I think that it needs to be said. That whole attitude is just what's wrong with this country as a whole. And we could dive into that a lot more, but I just want to thank all the federal employees that I know. I've seen some of the emails that they're being sent and the implications that they don't put in a hard day's work and the stuff that's coming down from above. And I can only imagine what that work environment must be like. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who is willing to be a public service to the public sector. And it's important, and I think people are going to learn real quickly how much we rely on it.
Cheers to that, yeah. Thank you. And we have folks online wishing to make not public comment, council comment. Councilor Vasika.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't get a chance while Mr. Hensel was saying the snowplow names, but I just wanted to recognize that he was just awarded as a Downtown Employee of the Year. And he, as the Deputy Director of Public Works and Mobility for Streets, is an amazing person, an amazing person for the city. And every time that I ask him about something that's going on with one of my constituents or something that's going on with the street, he's there either that day or the next. And not to set expectations, because sometimes weather gets in the way, but I'm just really impressed with him. And I just wanted to give a huge shout out to him for winning that award, because it's definitely well deserved. So thank you, Brian.
Thank you for that, Councilor Vasika. I very much appreciate you mentioning that for Mr. Hensel. He is so humble, he would never want to bring that up himself, but indeed, he was awarded Downtowner of the Year. And I think that really does highlight the dedication of many folks that are in public employees and public servants. They do it out of a passion. It's a sense of service. You're contributing to the greater good, and Brian really does see that, and he really does give 120%. Thank you for that. All right, I do think that wraps up all of our council comments this evening. That's a good note to end on. And we'll go ahead and we will adjourn this meeting at 8:49. Thanks, everybody.